The train's whistle cut through the hot Wyoming air, a long, mournful cry that sent prairie birds scattering from the telegraph lines. When the sound faded, the only noise left was the hiss of steam and the creak of wooden wheels against the platform. The air smelled of dust, iron, and faraway rain. Clara Mae Dalton stepped down from the last carriage, her gloved hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped her suitcase. She stood still for a moment, the hem of her faded calico dress brushing her boots, her bonnet tilted low to hide her face. The town of Sweetwater was little more than a handful of buildings scattered along the track. A saloon, a feed store, a church steeple peeking out behind a livery stable. Beyond it stretched miles of open country, raw and endless, where the land rolled toward a horizon so far it seemed to swallow the world. Her heart thudded painfully. What was she doing here? She'd left everything, what little she had, back in Missouri. No family, no home, no name that mattered. Just a worn-out woman of 26 who'd read a newspaper ad and thought, maybe this is a kind of salvation. Rancher seeks God-fearing woman for marriage. Mustn't be afraid of work. That was all it took. A few lines of ink and hope she'd been too foolish to let die. Now that she was here, though, her courage felt as thin as her Sunday gloves. She clutched her suitcase tighter and searched the platform. A few locals eyed her curiously, but no one approached. She was about to panic when she saw him. He stood at the far end of the platform, leaning against a fence post near a corral where a chestnut stallion pawed the dirt impatiently. Even from a distance, she could see he was tall, broad across the shoulders, his frame worn but strong like the land itself. His hat cast a shadow across his face, but she caught a glimpse of sun-browned skin and a jaw that looked carved from granite. Her pulse stumbled. Please let that not be him. But when he pushed off the post and began walking toward her, every step slow and certain, she knew. He moved like a man who belonged here, who'd never once doubted his place in the world. He stopped in front of her, boots dusty, eyes a shade of blue so deep it startled her. For a moment, neither spoke. "You must be Miss Dalton," he said finally, his voice low and even, touched with amusement. "Yes, sir," she managed, though her voice cracked. "Clara Mae Dalton. I hope the letter reached you." "I wasn't sure if it reached me," he said, a smile ghosting across his lips. "And from the looks of it, the train reached you too. Can't say many folks make it this far west unless they mean it." She swallowed hard, unsure what to do with her hands. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. If you've changed your mind, I can—" He chuckled, and the sound rolled through her like warm thunder. "Darlin, I didn't send for a ghost. I sent for a woman." The word Darlin made her cheeks burn. No one had called her that since her father, before sickness took him and left her scraping by on washing jobs and the kindness of strangers. He tipped his hat slightly. "Name's Colton Briggs. Folks just call me Colt." "Yes, Mr. Briggs." "Colt's fine," he said, his tone easy. "But you can call me whatever you like, long as you don't call me late for supper." The corner of her mouth twitched despite her nerves. He noticed, and his smile deepened, lines crinkling at the corners of his eyes. "Come on," he said, taking her suitcase from her trembling hand before she could protest. "I'll get you home before the heat burns us both to leather." Home. The word trembled in her chest, strange and fragile. She followed him down the steps toward the waiting wagon, a sturdy thing with wooden wheels and a pair of gray mules harnessed up front. The air shimmered with heat, the sky a hard, merciless blue. As he helped her climb up, his hand brushed hers, rough, calloused, but steady. She felt the strength in his grip and the warmth of it, and for a heartbeat she forgot how to breathe. Once seated, she clasped her hands in her lap, the suitcase wedged between her feet. He climbed beside her, flicked the reins, and the wagon lurched forward with a groan. The road stretched out of town into miles of grass and sky. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush, dry earth, and sun-warmed pine from the far hills. For a long while, neither spoke. Clara stared out at the landscape, its beauty both vast and lonely. She thought of the people she'd left behind, of the boarding house where whispers followed her like smoke, of the small airless room where she'd prayed for a way out. She thought she'd be relieved to be free of it all, but now she just felt small. Colton broke the silence first. "You ever seen country like this before?" "No, sir." "Then you're in for a sight come sunrise. This land changes color every hour. Morning gold, afternoon fire, night black as coffee." He glanced at her. "You'll get used to it." She nodded, though she wasn't sure she would. He turned back to the road, his profile calm, his shoulders easy. There was a quiet confidence about him, the kind that didn't need proving. "Mr. Briggs," she said softly, "I don't know much about ranching." "That's so? I can cook some and sew a little, but I've never worked land before. I'd hate to disappoint you." He smirked without looking at her. "I don't reckon disappointment's something I scare easy from. I figure if you can weather that train ride, you'll do just fine." "I only came because—" she hesitated, clutching her skirt, "because I had nowhere else left." He shot her a sidelong glance. His voice gentled. "Then maybe this is exactly where you're meant to be." They rode on, the wagon creaking over the dirt trail, the sound of the mule's hooves steady as a heartbeat. She sneaked another look at him, at the way the wind tugged at the brim of his hat, at the faint scar that cut across his jaw, at the hint of a smile he wore like a secret. When the ranch finally came into view, the air caught in her throat. Fenced pastures rolled down toward a river bend, cattle grazing in the distance. A weathered red barn stood beside a cabin with smoke rising gently from its chimney. It wasn't grand, but it looked alive. Lived in. Colton slowed the mules and glanced at her. "Well, Clara May, that's home." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For the first time in years, something in her chest loosened. Maybe it was relief, or maybe it was hope daring to lift its head. He stopped the wagon, hopped down, and turned to offer his hand. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. His palm was warm, his fingers firm around hers. "Careful there," he said with a small grin. "Ground's softer than it looks after the morning rain." She stepped down, her boots sinking slightly into the dirt. She took a slow breath, eyes on the cabin, the golden grass, the mountains rising beyond. When she turned back, Colton was watching her. Not like a man judging what he'd bought, but like a man quietly measuring the weight of what he'd found. "You don't have to be afraid," he said finally. His voice was softer now, steady and sure. Then, with a teasing glint in his eye, he added, "I don't bite, unless you give me reason to." The color rose hot in her cheeks. She looked down, but the smallest smile tugged at her lips. Colton chuckled, that easy, low laugh again, and reached for her suitcase. "Come on, Darlin. Let's get you settled." As he led her toward the cabin, Clara glanced at his back, at the steady swing of his shoulders and the dust rising behind his boots. For the first time since leaving Missouri, her fear began to fade, slowly, cautiously, like mist lifting from the prairie after dawn. And somewhere deep inside, hope whispered that maybe, just maybe, this wild country was ready to love her back. Rain tapped steadily against the cabin windows, soft at first, then harder as the storm gathered its fury over the plains. The evening had crept in gray and heavy, the clouds swallowing the last of the sun until the world outside blurred into a wash of silver and shadow. Inside, the little cabin flickered with lamplight, its walls warm with the scent of wood smoke and the faint sweetness of cornbread cooling on the table. Clara stood by the hearth, her hands twisting the corner of her apron as thunder rolled across the hills. It had been nearly 2 weeks since she'd arrived at the Briggs Ranch, and though she tried to move like she belonged, there were moments when her heart still felt like a startled bird. She'd never lived so far from everything she knew, never seen skies so wide or nights so endless. The land had a voice, wind through the grass, coyotes crying in the dark, and sometimes she thought it spoke a language she was only beginning to understand. Colton sat at the table, polishing his rifle with easy rhythm, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows. He didn't talk much while he worked. He never did unless he had something worth saying. But she could feel him there, solid, grounded, a quiet presence that somehow made the little cabin feel larger. When the thunder cracked again, Clara flinched. The sound seemed to tear straight through the roof, shaking the shelves and rattling the window panes. She turned sharply, pressing a hand to her chest. Colton's voice came from behind her, calm and low. "Storms spook you?" "A little," she admitted. Her voice was small, nearly lost beneath the rain. "Back home, the valley used to flood. I've seen barns carried clean away. The sound always makes me think it's coming again." He nodded, setting the rifle aside. "This one'll pass." "Always does," but she didn't move. She stood by the window, staring into the sheets of rain that blurred the pastures. The lightning flared, lighting up the world in brief, blinding flashes, and for a heartbeat she saw her reflection in the glass. Pale face, wide eyes, a woman who didn't look quite sure who she'd become. Then she felt him move. The creak of the floorboards, slow and deliberate, until he was standing just behind her. The warmth of his nearness seeped through her thin dress. She didn't turn, but she could feel the steady rhythm of his breath at her back. "You're working yourself near to bone," he said quietly. "You don't have to prove anything, Clara." "I'm not," she whispered. I want to do right by you." He gave a soft, thoughtful hum. "You're already doing right by me." Lightning flashed again, and this time she turned. His face was only inches away, his blue eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. The lamplight caught in his hair, gold against the darkness, and for the first time she noticed the faint scar that curved just above his temple. She wanted to ask how he got it, but couldn't find her voice. "I don't reckon you've had much kindness in your life," he said, not unkindly. Her breath caught. She looked down, fingers tightening around her apron, not the kind that lasted. He reached out then, slow and sure, and touched her cheek. The pad of his thumb brushed her skin, rough but gentle. "Well," he murmured, "maybe it's time you did." For a long moment neither moved. The fire crackled softly, filling the quiet between them. Clara felt the tremor rise in her chest, that strange mixture of fear and something else, something that felt dangerously like longing. "Colton," she whispered, his name trembling on her lips like a secret. He smiled faintly, his voice dipping into that low, teasing drawl she'd come to recognize. "Remember what I told you when you got off that train?" Her heart thudded. "That you don't bite?" He chuckled, the sound rolling through the small room like distant thunder. "Unless you give me reason to." Her lips curved despite herself. "And what would count as reason?" He leaned in just enough that his breath brushed her temple. "You keep looking at me the way you are right now," he said softly, "and you might just find out." The words made her dizzy. She didn't step back. Instead, she looked up at him, her gaze flickering over the lines of his face, the quiet strength in his jaw, the tenderness he tried to hide behind a grin. For the first time since arriving, she wasn't afraid. "I think," she said, barely more than a whisper, "I'm not scared anymore." He studied her for a moment longer, as though weighing what she meant. Then he tilted his head slightly, the edge of a smile tugging at his lips. "Good, I've been waiting for you to say that." When he kissed her, it wasn't wild or hurried. It was steady, unshaken, like a promise spoken in the language of touch. His hand slid to the back of her neck, guiding her closer, and she melted into him, the storm outside forgotten. The taste of rain lingered on the air, the firelight painting gold along the curve of his cheek. For Clara, it felt like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the slow, even thump of his heart. He kept one arm around her, holding her like she might break if he let go too soon. "See?" he murmured against her hair. "Told you I don't bite hard." She laughed then, an honest, startled laugh that filled the cabin and startled even herself. It had been years since she'd heard that sound. It felt good. It felt alive. They stood that way for a long while, the storm easing outside, the rain softening to a hush. The fire burned low, casting the room in a warm, flickering glow. When she finally stepped back, her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright in the lamplight. "I should see to the cornbread," she said, her voice trembling with the effort to sound composed. He grinned. "You do that, Mrs. Briggs." She froze, the title catching her off guard. "You haven't even asked me proper." He shrugged, reaching for his hat from the table. "Didn't need to. Feels like you've already said yes." Her heart gave a flutter at his confidence, but she didn't correct him. She just turned toward the stove, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. Outside, the thunder rolled farther away, fading into the distance. The scent of wet earth drifted through the open window, mingling with the smell of cornbread and smoke. The world felt cleaner, renewed. Later that night, long after the dishes were done and the storm had passed, Clara sat on the porch wrapped in one of Colton's old blankets. The stars had returned, scattered bright across the dark sky. From somewhere in the barn came the low murmur of horses settling in for the night. Colton joined her, lowering himself onto the step beside her. For a while they didn't speak. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with the soft night sounds of crickets and the whisper of wind through grass. He glanced at her finally. "You know, Clara May," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "the day you stepped off that train, you looked like the wind could blow you clean away." She smiled faintly. "And now?" "Now," he said, eyes glinting under the starlight, "you look like the kind of woman who could outlast the wind itself." She turned to look at him, her chest tightening with something she didn't dare name, the stars reflected in his eyes steady and bright. "I think," she said softly, "this place might finally feel like home." Colton smiled, slow and warm. "That's all I wanted, Darlin. A woman who'd stay." When he reached over and took her hand, she didn't pull away. She laced her fingers through his, and together they sat under the wide Wyoming sky while the last of the storm faded into the night, two hearts learning, slowly and surely, that love could grow even from fear.